Kingdom Talks. We have Mike Parsons as our guest today. Mike, thank you for being on here. Always good to have you. And we have Berlin as a guest host, and we've just got off well, we're not even off the tour. We're in the middle of the tour, the 5-week tour, and we've had 3 events. Keck on the Road, where we've done Kingdom Equipping Center, our church, kind of on the road while we're traveling. And we've done it in Mississippi, and then in Nashville, and then here in Moravian Falls just last night. It's been absolutely wonderful. If you haven't seen those shows, please go back and take a look. We've had 8 to 9 people on the panel, leaders from this movement, and all of them, we're all in the same place where we're looking for that unity and love, where we get to move forward together. And it's just been wonderful. So really encourage you to go take a look at those shows. So right now, anything else, Berlin, before I launch in too quickly? I'm just trying to think. So next week we will be in Moravian Falls. So this coming Sunday, we will be in Colorado Springs this coming Sunday. So please join us there. Go to the website, check out the Keck on the Road, and find out where we're going to be next. So next week it is Colorado Springs, and the following week we will be in San Diego. So join us. It's been absolutely wonderful having these panels and hearing from all these different leaders. So, all right. So let's go ahead and launch in.
A lot of fun being on the panel too.
Yes, yeah. And so, Mike, the questions I've been asking the panel are, what do you see in this movement, this movement of God that we're looking at and we're all in and flowing with? What excites you about what's coming?
That's a good question. I mean, actually, I'm in the moment, I'm just going through preparing Vision Destiny 2020, which is a teaching series I do beginning of every year, really just sharing my journals. So I've just reviewed sort of 50, 60,000 words of journaling, things that God has been speaking to me during the year. So I put that into, I think, 14 PowerPoint presentations.
Wow.
So I'm going to have 14 sessions of it, sharing really just what God has been showing me, things that I encountered, experiences I had in the previous year, and where does that then point for this year. So
good.
I'm excited in the things thematically. Until you go back over something, you don't always see the patterns of the things that God said. Yeah. And sometimes you see God's repeated himself a number of times in different ways because you probably didn't get it the first time. So he went again. And I picked up a number of things really which are focused for me about restoration of all things and where that's going and how we can bring people together in that whole process of seeing a unified way of looking at the restoration of all things from different perspectives. And what I've really seen and what God spoke to me about was, the river of life flowing out of heaven flowed into the earth and then split into 4 streams and watered the earth. And what I've really been looking at and what God's been speaking to me about is 4 streams coming back together to become one river. So those 4 streams in the whole concept of restoration of all things would be the mystic stream of encountering God in such a way that you actually experience his heart and get an understanding of his heart for restoration, which then motivates you as a son of God to begin to engage creation for its freedom, as he wants to reveal us as sons to bring creation into that freedom. So that's one stream. And the mystic stream for me, the more I've got intimate with God, the more I've discovered the depth of his love, and the more that love has empowered me to want to love others and love creation and take my responsibility as a son towards creation more seriously than it was before. Because I didn't really, years ago, wouldn't have had any concept of engaging creation. It would have been, hey, I'm just trying to get through every day. So, now there's a bigger picture to that. So that's one aspect. And I would say that if people are going to get more intimate with God, it should unveil the truer nature of who God is and therefore challenge some of the religious perspectives that we may have been brought up with. I mean, I was brought up, in a evangelical Brethren church, which was pretty rigid and legalistic about God and about everything. And then looking back, I realized we were living under the old covenant, even though we're in the new. So a lot of that, shaped how I viewed God and how I viewed the future.
Mm-hmm.
So then you have the eschatology, which is the second stream. How we view the future will very much determine what we could believe about restoration. Because
Yeah.
if you believe it's going to end up, being destroyed by fire and whatever, then there's not an awful lot of point taking care of it now or looking
Right.
for it to be restored. Well, it's God's going to do it, and
Yeah.
He's
It's
going to
all
do
been
it by
burned, so let's
fire,
redo
by
it again.
destroying it and starting again.
Yeah.
Well, that actually isn't restoration.
Right.
Restoration doesn't start again. Restoration restores what you have back to its original
That's
condition,
good.
which is very different from starting
Right.
again. And if you think that the future is doom and gloom and misery, then you don't have much of a perspective of, well, we can do something about this as sons of God, and therefore legislation and governing and bringing in the kingdom to fill the earth, which is
Irrelevant.
what it says it's going to do, and the glory of God to cover the earth, which it says it's what it's going to do. Then all of that comes down to, well, Jesus will do that when he returns.
Yeah.
And so everything is put off to the future, to an event, rather than a process that we're all part of. So we have no part. We're bystanders to observe what Jesus will do at the end of time if we're not involved in a process of restoration now. So eschatology becomes quite a focus, and therefore there are streams in eschatology which are viewing that what the Bible talks about as happening has already happened, and now we're in the period of restoration of all things, and the Bible has nothing to say to that other than we're in the period of restoration of all things, and all things are going to be restored. So it's down to us to hear God personally, individually, corporately, to what is he saying today.
All will be
Because
taught of the
if
Lord. Yeah.
I'm listening to what he said 2,000 years ago to people, or 4,000 years ago, or 6,000 years ago, to people in those areas, then I'm trying to interpret their culture, their situation, and trying to make sense of it to apply it today, rather than Jesus actually promised that we would hear his voice.
Yeah.
And we have the spirit of truth to bring us into a revelation of the truth, the way, the truth, and the life. Therefore, the view that actually we shouldn't really be looking at the Bible to tell us what's going to happen in the future, and the eschatological position for, well, this has already taken place, now we need to get on with it, means an ongoing personal relationship where we're hearing God's voice dependent on him every day to continue our work here. So there's two streams. The other stream, that when you begin to realize that what Jesus said primarily was for the generation he was speaking to, and he said all these things that are going to take place are going to take place in this generation, and he meant that generation that was alive. And there are a number of scriptures which talk about, you will not die until you see this happening, and there will be
Right.
some standing here and all these things will take place in this generation, in Matthew 24:34, I think it is. So
Yeah.
then you think, okay, Jesus is saying that the destruction of the temple and all of the things in Matthew 24 and all those things are happening in that generation. Okay, well, what about the things that he said, like people going into outer darkness, people going into Gehenna, people going into, quote, hell? Well, that was also in context the same thing. So it
Yeah.
wasn't talking about a future, some 2,000 years, 3,000 years, however long, where people are going to be tossed into some furnace and tortured forever. He was actually talking about Gehenna being a literal place, which was the rubbish dump, which was burning with fire and
Mm-hmm.
full of worms, eating up the rubbish, turning it into compost effectively. That actually he was talking about the people who failed to follow him and leave Jerusalem when they saw armies coming to surround it would end up in Gehenna. And if you were, in a sense, understanding covenant, if you were in covenant with God, you were living in the light. And if you were outside of covenant, you were living in the darkness. So outer darkness was outside the covenant in which you gnashed your teeth, which was the sign of frustration, nothing to do with
Mm.
torment. It
Right.
was so frustrated that actually we're angry. And you look in Acts 7, where Stephen was talking about this open heaven, they gnashed their teeth. because they were so angry because he was saying, well, you've missed Jesus, you've missed the Messiah.
Yeah.
So you have the eschatology, and then that leads on to the universal perspective of, actually, Jesus was not talking about hell in the way that we see it, and therefore, actually, when you then look at, well, what was he talking about? And well, what is the concept of what happens to people after they die? Because in that whole thing, the area of eternal, forever and ever, everlasting, the word in Greek for that, enios, and in Hebrew, olam, do not mean eternal, forever, and everlasting. They just don't mean that. They mean
Yeah.
enduring to a particular age or time period. Therefore, we're living in this way of looking at that as coming together in three streams that will begin to make sense of this. And then the fourth stream for me is a restoration of the abilities and powers in sonship, which are to do with healing and wholeness and the energy healing type thing, in terms of understanding frequency and vibration and consciousness and choosing and all the quantum physics things that we're now discovering, that make sense of what Jesus did when he did his miracles. You know, they weren't magic,
Yeah.
they were him using a higher level of authority as the creator to actually effectively outwork in creation that which was only a manipulation of matter and energy, turning water into wine, or disappearing, or going through people, or all of those things, walking on water. It was all to do with how he used vibration and frequency to take him out of one thing into another dimension, or to change the vibrational molecules that were became solid when he walked on water. So everything like that sort of is a restoration of that understanding and knowledge, which mostly has been taken by the new age and therefore put off limits to believers because we essentially let them have it.
Right.
Now we need to see it restored. And I believe God is going to restore the full functions of sonship, which means the ability to use light and sound, the ability to create using conscious
Love
thought
that.
and choice, which is all part of, I think, restoration. So I see these four streams coming together to be one river, which will fill the earth, you know, and bring the restoration of everything in that
Love
way.
that.
So I'm pretty excited about that. And, you know, God really spoke to me a lot about that last year. And we did the conference, and hopefully next year we're going to do several more conferences, which really begin to help people put this into perspective from those four streams, to actually see that actually this is a unified whole. This makes sense when it comes together into one river rather than these four separate streams that are all coming from different perspectives. And a lot of people aren't even aware of each other, or even the other streams are heading in the same direction.
Yeah.
And I do believe God wants to bring that sort of connection between people, that we'll realize that we're actually moving towards the same point, which is God restoring things and us being involved. So that's sort
Amen.
of a one of the key
I
that,
love that.
excited me.
I love all that, the quantum physics and vibration and frequency and stuff like that. I can't help think though that once somebody like walks on water or is able to walk through a wall, then I just, my heart kind of hurts for it being a parlor trick.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? It's like almost, I almost don't want it. I want to keep it in the mysterious, but then again, I know that when when push comes to shove and we're going to have their internet shut down and all of these things, if this really does happen, we're going to have to be able to unite and work together in some way. And so we're going to have to learn how to use these principles to do this. So
Yeah.
I'm excited for it. It's just going to be, it's
Yeah.
just,
I
Yeah.
mean, I know how to do those things because Jesus showed me how to do them, but there's no need to do them if you don't need to do them. He didn't go round living his whole life in that way. He did
yeah.
it when he needed to do it to fulfill doing what the Father had shown him.
Yeah.
So it was a mandated thing rather
Mhm.
than, well, I'm going to show off or I'm going to demonstrate what I can do. It was, I need to do this to be able to do this, therefore I will do it. And
But if he was teaching someone, like if he would have had a water walking class, You know what I mean? Which is what we're doing. Literally, right now, we're teaching people that this is possible, right? Well, when someone is actually doing it, they're going to be teaching. So therefore, is it necessary? Yes and no, you know?
Yeah, I mean, some of the perspective to it is, we in immaturity people can use things and it be self-promoting.
Yeah,
Jesus never promoted himself, it was always about the Father. So
yeah,
his desire in doing those amazing things was that people would look to his Father. And it says, in Matthew, it talks about that we would do our good works before men, that they would glorify our Father in heaven. So whatever we do, it should not be drawing attention to us, but actually drawing attention to the Father who
yes,
is mandating us to do certain things.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I know how to walk on water, but I've never had any occasion to do it. And even if I could do it, I don't think I would be looking to walk across the swimming pool just to show, hey, I can do it. It would be because there's a need to do it within the mandate that God's given me on a daily basis. Now, I have relocated and done certain things in that way because I needed to do it in a situation. And therefore, I chose to do that because I know how to do it. But I don't do it every day just because it would make it easier for me to get to work or go home. I drive, because I don't have a mandate to do that every day. And I think this is where living our life only doing what we see the Father
yeah,
doing and engaging in that, hearing his voice and outworking his heart, I think will free us from these things becoming parlor tricks. And the
and
majority of times, most people will never need to know that you've done them.
yeah, and
They will
that
be
is such a
done to
key.
help you.
That is such a major key to understand that we need to make sure that we are doing these things as we see the Father doing them, and that in itself will help keep down the chaos in the sense of like you said, people doing the parlor tricks and doing it in order to bring a crowd and to make more money, whatever it might be. That is not the motivation, but it's simply doing what the Father calls us to do. And what I find usually is what the Father calls us to do is so much lower and so much more in humility than what we would normally do. And so it is a key to do what we see the Father doing. And honestly, we get to the place where we're doing no more, no less, just engaged and fully, one with the Father and walking with Him, not ahead and not behind, but doing what He's doing. Such a key. So
It is.
there's this element then of moving forward in the restoration of all things. So I mean, this I think is a big piece of what we're all so excited about. It's some people are getting excited about what we'll be able to do as mature sons, and there's definitely some room for some excitement there. But that's not the end all. That's not what it's all about. It's about the oneness of coming together with the Father and the body. That to me is what it's all about. And so when we start having division over things, and who's got the greatest knowledge, we're completely deconstructing something we shouldn't be deconstructing, which is the oneness. So anyway, as we move forward, obviously there's the challenge of unity, and there's those people that don't. Well, we've already said this many times. Not everybody believes the same. There's just no way that everybody would believe the same exactly. Otherwise, there'd be no need for the other people. The differences coming together are what gives us the full picture. And so, as we move forward in the unity, what are some things that you see there? What are some of the challenges that we would need to, kind of, face off with? Again, what's the Father doing? How do we move forward in unity? Do you have any suggestions there?
Well, again, I think if one of the things that I engaged last year, in a theme that went through the year, was the oracles of the Father's heart. And an oracle is an utterance or a direct utterance, or a person who makes utterances that come directly from God. And in the order of Melchizedek, we're supposed to be lion, ox, eagle, man. And one of those aspects is oracle. So a prophetic sense of carrying the weight of the word that God speaks or reveals, so that you can outwork that. And that I had an encounter where I was in the four faces of God, and I was looking through the eyes of the ox, because I wanted to engage in sense of what is the weight of God's heart. You know, what is his heart? And wisdom came and stood in front of me and said, I want to unveil the oracles of the Father's heart. So I thought, wow, okay. And I didn't know what I was, going to experience, but I experienced intense emotional experiences of the Father's heart. It wasn't like just revelation. It was, this is how the Father feels about things. This is how his love gets expressed. So when it then goes on to unity and other things, an encounter with the Father and his heart really gives you a foundation then for outworking that. And so the 5 things that wisdom showed me, and there may be many more, but these are the 5 things that she showed me, was passion, that God is passionate about all his children and all of creation, everything he's made. And then there was burning desire. So God has got a burning desire that all his children, all of creation would be restored and in relationship with him. Yeah. Then there was intense joy, that when God looks at us, he is intensely filled with joy, because he just looks at us as he made us to be, rather than maybe the way we've ended up. And he's not looking at all the mess. He's just looking at restored, and therefore he's intensely joyful. And most people will think, well, no, God couldn't be intensely joyful over me. Look at my life. Well, he's not looking at all those circumstances that we focus on. He's looking at who we are, not what we've done or those things. So that was the third one. Then there was deep compassion. So God is deeply compassionate about the fact that we're not seeing ourselves the way he sees us, or living in the fullness, or we may be broken or fragmented or damaged or any of those things. He has deep compassion, which actually moves him to do something about it, which is to heal us and restore us and renew us and bring us back to what he originally intended. And the last one is overwhelming love. And his love wins. His love won. His love will win, and it's never not going to win. And we cannot be separated from his love. So it overwhelms. It overcomes every obstacle, every hindrance to us having a relationship with him. And he's already reconciled the world to himself and doesn't hold anything against everyone, 2 Corinthians 5:19. Therefore, from his perspective, it's already a done deal. We're already included in that relationship. From our perspective, we may or may not know that, or experience various degrees of revelation and experience of that. So all of that really then caused me to look at the opposition that I and others sort of experience from others who don't perhaps agree or don't like what we're saying, or may see it as heretical or other words that they use. Then God loves them. God loves them equally as he loves me and everyone else. So if therefore I've received that revelation of the Father's heart, then when I see people who may be feeling that they're in opposition to anything I'm doing or whatever, then how can I be moved by anything other than that God is passionate about those people? He's got a burning desire for those people. He has intense joy over those people and overwhelming love and deep compassion. So how can I have any less? So then if people do that, I have to deal with my emotions, because you can't deny emotions. It's not nice when people say nasty things or, whatever, but actually people are saying nasty things about God all the time, and it makes no difference to him. In a sense, he loves them anyway. So love is unconditional. And if we've experienced unconditional love, like love one another as I have loved you, then that's outworked primarily through forgiveness. So if someone does something negative, I can choose to forgive them, release them, and bless them. And if I can't bless them, then I've not really forgiven them, and want the best for them. So I see unity and what God wants to do in bringing us together relationally is not based on uniformity of belief. You know, we don't
Right.
have to agree with everything to be still all children of God, all start of the same family, all in Christ, and Christ is in all. So really, we're not separated, other than in our own thinking
Yes.
that causes us to separate people from us on the basis of what they believe.
And that's really a massive, for me anyway, it's a massive sign of maturity that we can walk in unity together even though we disagree with one another and don't believe the same. I mean, that to me is one of the highest levels of maturity that we can walk in. And when we are not able to walk with others just because they don't believe the way we do, I would be saying, if anybody's in that position out there that's listening right now, go to the Father and ask Him. This is a good place to go to the Father and say, "Judge me, please." I mean, and this is a good thing. Again, if you haven't heard us talk about the judgment and God as judge, go back and listen to some of the other shows. But the judgment has been so twisted by the church. It's not a bad thing. It's a very good thing. He's judging you to life. He's for you. But go to the Father and say, "Judge me." Whatever's in me that's not allowing me to step into that next level of maturity, so I can walk with my brothers and sisters in love and unity, even though we disagree or don't believe the same. It's an area that we all need to keep growing in. All of us do.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
you
And
you know that reminds me of, I love the way you put this, Gil. I put things on a shelf or in my warehouse that I don't understand or I don't have personal revelation on. So what I do when I hear two different views or possibly even more views on the same thing, I just put them on the shelf and I just trust that God will show me what I need to know in the timing that I need to know it. And until
Yes.
then, it's in the warehouse and I can just love the people and just kind of let go that they have this weird belief that I don't know
Yeah,
about that thing.
you don't need to bring it out and yet let it be a divider. Just keep it in the
Exactly,
warehouse and
exactly.
let it simmer for a while until Father
Right.
is ready to show you.
And let me just have full disclosure. There are some things that Mike talks about that is like, I don't know about that. So they're in my warehouse, Mike. So, but I still love you.
well,
Yeah.
because I think that that's really, if we're going to draw hard, fast lines, then that's an indication that we think we know everything there is to know. That's a dangerous
Exactly.
place to be in. I mean, I like, in the early church when, I mean, can you imagine they've got like thousands of years of old covenant that they are the people of God, and all of a sudden Jesus says, "Well, I've just come now to take the kingdom away from you and to give it to this new group who are going to include you if you want it, but are going to include everyone else." That was a huge challenge,
There, yeah.
and they therefore faced that challenge, and that he came and it's like, "You've heard it said, you've heard it said, you've heard it said, you've heard it said. Well, I say unto you." So he was challenging just because they'd heard it said for generations, and that they believed this for generations. He was coming and saying, "Well, actually, I'm going to tell you the truth, and it's going to so shake you that now you've got a choice whether you're going to stay where you are, believing what you've always believed, or allow me to unveil something new and take you into something which is going to take you beyond what you could have ever possibly imagined or thought under this old way of looking at it, into something new."
Mhm.
And he's still doing that. He's not stopped doing that. And if we think we know everything, then we're basically saying that we have the full knowledge of God. And the reality is, no one of us has the full knowledge of God. He's
Right.
infinite, and we've got
Right.
a whole process continuing in that thing to actually begin to experience the reality of who he really is, and that is inevitably going to challenge what we think.
Yeah.
And all of us are on that journey. It doesn't matter who we are, where we've come from. We're all moving towards a level of intimacy and maturity in sonship, which is inevitably going to renew our minds and change what we
Yes.
thought again and again and again. And if we're willing to follow that process, then we won't need to dishonor those who are also on their process, because
So
Right.
good.
they've come from a different place, they're on a different journey, but they're all heading to the same place.
Right.
And therefore let's respect that and realize that it's okay. If I was to look at myself, my 10-year ago self, today I would have thought I would be a heretic.
Right.
And
Right.
Right.
I think
because
we all would.
essentially,
Yeah.
because actually then I saw things then and I thought that was true. And now I've had 10 years worth of experiences, which has totally changed those beliefs. And that's the journey that we're all on. And if we respect that we're all on a journey, we don't need to actually then come out and say, this is the destination. Because
Yeah.
ultimately, that's what you're saying. If you're saying, we've now come to an agreement that this is it, we're at the destination. Well, therefore, there's nowhere to go. And this
Right.
movement will stop and effectively become rigid, and it will become another denominational stream
Right.
Yeah.
because it now thinks we are at the destination and we know it.
Right.
Right.
You
And
know,
We
one
that's
of
a
have
the
to.
dangerous
questions that
place.
I love to ask when speaking to a group is just, has anybody here ever been wrong? You know, and of course, if
Right.
they're honest,
Exactly.
every hand goes up. Then the fact is, if you were wrong in the past, is it likely you could be wrong now about something? You know, and again, when we're all thinking clearly and in our right mind, we can say, yes, I'm probably wrong about some of the things I believe. So why would we then want to hold on to so many things? Because I can guarantee you there were things that and almost everybody listening probably is just really held strongly to, thinking that this is it, and we find out it's not. So why
Well,
would we want to set ourselves in that position again and again and again? Hold everything loosely,
But if you
because we
go
need to
back
be
again,
flexible.
go back to the early church and go back to the Pharisees and the Sadducees and those that thought they had the truth,
right.
and that truth gave them position,
Yeah.
it gave them recognition, it gave them financial security, it gave them all of those things. Their identity was coming from the fact that they were of knowledge of the law, that they had all this stuff tied up, that they were rabbis of that whatever. That gave them their identity because of what they knew and therefore the positions they were in. And of course they didn't want to let go of that, their reputation,
Yeah.
Hmm.
so they
You know,
kept
so
it.
And
if you're listening to this, in fact, I want to put it in the show notes. I just feel like this particular show is incredible for important, incredibly important for people to hear. So if you would share it with anybody, just share this show with a lot of people, because this message needs to get out so that we all are on the same page, understanding that we need to walk in humility and not get our identity tied up in any position, and just be willing to again, hold things loosely and walk together in community. A lot of that is coming out in this particular show. So share this show,
Yeah.
please share
And
it.
if you go back
I
to
just want to I
yeah,
want to talk about that sometimes it's in us. We need to look at what's going on in us. If I'm not giving myself the freedom to fail, to be wrong, like I'm holding on so hard because my identity, like you said, is wrapped up in this idea. If I don't even give myself that freedom to fail and know that I'll be okay if I was wrong, I'll still be okay, then we're never going to be able to allow others the freedom to fail. And who is to say that when a child is starting to walk, you have to start on the left foot instead of the right? You know, so I just believe that if we could just allow that grace with ourselves, then we will be able to afford it to others and give them the grace to, take missteps. Now, here's another thing though, as brothers and sisters and in the body, we need to watch out for each other when you're over the edge. And so that's why we need to be in community and have a level of trust that we tie a rope around our waist and say, I'm going out there, but we trust that other people will pull us back in unity and in
In love.
love if we
Yeah.
do go over the edge because we were exploring and we just got off, right? But it's not, we have to reserve judgment on that. And I think that that's the problem, is that we judge if someone goes off rather than just helping them get back. And
That's
so
so
if we
good.
could love them back into it, and if they have the humility to, have that rope around their waist and allow to be pulled back, I think that we can all grow together from this shared experience of, oh, that's where the edge is for now. God tends to move and change and shift things, but for now, we don't have enough revelation or enough maturity to handle going beyond that edge. And that's where that edge is.
Yeah, and on the flip side
That's
of
good.
that, sometimes if you are in relationship with people and you're connected in that relational way, when you do go off the edge, and actually it is beyond what we know now, but it's actually God taking you off the edge,
Right.
Yeah.
then others can come with you because they trust that you're actually following God in it. And the rope may be
Yeah.
long enough that they can stay where they are for quite a long time
Yeah.
before you've gone far enough to pull them that way.
Yeah,
So I
that's
think there's
true.
both sides of that. I think that
Yeah.
the danger is that when we start to police it, not out of love, but out of
Out of
fear,
fear.
Correct.
people are getting astray. Because at the end of the day, if you look at what we're encouraged to look at, it's much more about the fruit of our lives rather than the revelation or the gifts or everything else. Jesus didn't really
Right.
say, look, people are going to be known by the amazing miracles they do. He really said, people are going to be known by their character, really, the fruit of their character, which
Love.
essentially operating in love.
Yeah.
And therefore, when we look at people, we should not get jealous because they're going further ahead or fearful that they're going further ahead and leaving us behind, but actually coming from that place of love, of wanting the best for that person. And I think when it comes to then, well, it's leading everyone astray and everyone's going to get off track, blah, blah, blah. Well, I think the early church, again, Gamaliel, who was one of the rabbis at the time, and I think Paul was related to him, his view was very simple. If this is God, then you don't want to be opposed to it. If it's not God, God will deal with it. It will fail, like all the other things have eventually petered out when it's not of God. He won't endorse something which is not of him. So trust him rather than trying to do the policing for him.
Yes.
God is big
Yeah.
enough to handle our mistakes and where we're not getting it 100% right on the journey. Because our journey is one of various milestones that are enabling us to get to somewhere else. If I hadn't have gone through 5 or 6 processes, I wouldn't have been in the place where he could have deconstructed my thinking in areas, because the other 5 or 6 processes got me to the point where I was able to hear him without the restrictions of my own understanding getting in the way. And that took a long time for me, and if
That's a
we
good way to
believe
put it.
all of us are in that journey, then let's trust God
Yes.
in it rather than
And
feel we have to do God's job in it for
Yeah.
other people. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't love one another, care. And if someone's going off morally, then that's a different thing to going and doing and revelation that we may not understand, whatever. There are very clear things about the moral side of righteousness and doing things in a righteous way, which we should be, of course, concerned about in each other,
Yeah.
but not necessarily thinking about the doctrinal positions as being the
Yes.
major things. We
Yeah.
should be concerned about fruit and character development. And actually, that's where we can help each other, because we've all got blind self areas that
Right.
we can't see that other people
Yeah.
quite often can see really easily. Part of it is
Exactly.
most people don't have deep enough relationships to be honest with people about what they see in a loving way. So
Yeah.
they see something, but they don't want to say because they don't want to be rejected or they're fearful, whatever the reasons. See, I can
Well,
be honest with people and say, please tell me what you see to help me. And they can
Yes.
be dishonest with me and not tell me.
right. Right.
And I think that's the key, is being honest and open to be able to
And
share with each other. We have a process which we use in our therapeutic community. We run a therapy community for people with addictions. and it's called a Jaharis window. And it has four sort of views of life. There is revealed self, the things that I don't mind anybody knowing about me, that I'm very open about. Then there's hidden self. There's stuff I know about me that I don't want anyone else to know about me, so I hide it from people. Then there's blind self, which is the things that I don't know, but other people may know, and God certainly knows, that's for sure. That I want to be open for those blind self areas that other people can help me. And then there's true self. That's the self that God knows about us. And therefore, when we know ourselves like he knows us, then we don't need to hide anything and we can be who we are. And there's a process in that of being vulnerable and being open and saying to people, look, I want you to share with me anything that you see. I'm going to take it back to God and I'm going to weigh it. And if I get defensive, you know, okay, most of us get defensive when we first start to hear stuff that we don't like, but bear with me and I commit that I'll take everything back to God and, you know, operate that way. And, you know, I remember someone came to me once and they said, I think you're operating in self-righteousness. And I was like, my inside, I felt, no, I'm not. Yeah, but I didn't say so. So I said, well, okay, give me some examples, you know, show me, you know, so I can see. And I, to be honest, I was like, no, I don't really believe that. But I took it back to God and God said, well, of course you are. Isn't everybody? And I thought, oh, well, I suppose so, really. So it was like, God was like, is that a big problem to you to admit that? So I went back to the guy there. I said, look, yeah, I'm right. You're right. And I'm really sorry. And, you know, God's shown me some areas as well as some of the things you showed me. And I don't want to be that way. So, because someone who's got conviction can often come over in self-righteousness because you believe that you know what's true. But actually, it wasn't just that. It was that was a trait that God needed to deal with.
Yeah.
So he dealt with it. And again, humbling yourself under God's mighty hand. Sometimes God's mighty hand is other people.
Right.
And it's easy when you think it's God. It's not so easy when it's someone else who's the hand of God in that situation. But in the long run, what does it matter? I want to be the person that God knows me to be. And therefore, if there are things hindering that, hey, let's get them out of the way. And you know, be open.
One of the things I like to share, and for the most part, I like to just try to keep things as simple as possible. And so this is just one of those simple things. It's just like, what if everybody just, especially in your community that loves you, that you're in, what if you just assumed that everybody had your best in mind? So that when someone comes to you and shares something like that with you, that you immediately are thinking, okay, so this person loves me, has my best in mind, you know, I need to hear this and receive it and take it to the Father. Because I can't tell you how many times, you know, we've all been in these situations where people get offended over something that you did that you intended to be good, and they took it the wrong way.
Yeah.
And it's just, you know, it's like, what is in us that makes us take it the wrong way and think that people are out to get us? It's one of those things that we really need to take to the Father and have it washed in the blood of Jesus so that we can just operate in love, because in love, we're going to assume that the person has our best in mind.
Yeah.
And what a way that would change the world.
Wait.
What was that, Berlin?
Absolutely.
I was just going to say, those are our triggers. Why are our triggers here? And that's something that we need to move or, you know, release.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, let's face it, we must have areas in our lives that we don't see. Otherwise, we would be perfectly like Jesus 100% all of the time. And that's plainly, obviously not true.
Right.
So there's got to be things where we may be broken or fragmented or damaged or hurt or have coping mechanisms, defense mechanisms to cope with life because of our past that have not yet been dealt with. Now, I know, you know, you get it's all dealt with on the cross. Well, yeah, Jesus did everything on the cross so that we could be totally healed, restored in every way, but our minds need to be renewed to come into the reality of that. And that's a process, not an event. you
Yeah,
know.
and that comes back to the idea of, yes, everything is complete in Christ. All is done. You're perfect. You're complete. The only issue now is we got to walk it out here in our linear timeline and break out of the lies that have been placed over us so that we can walk in the fullness of the truth that everything is done and complete in Him.
Yeah, and that's the process that we can all be in, and therefore let's give each other grace that we're all on that journey, we're all in that process, and therefore at various stages of that process we may be in more or less good state, not so good state, falling apart state in all sorts of times, when sometimes that's what brings things to the surface. You know,
Yes.
Jesus sort of challenged people, Paul challenged, it was like, it is through trials and difficulties often that bring those things to the surface. So when we have relational problems with others, those are the very things that actually show us where we really are on that journey, and whether we're being defensive, whether we're getting aggressive, whether we're angry. The things that come up emotionally are the indicators of, are there triggers there? And if, you know, we're disagreeing over different doctrinal things and people are, how does that make me feel? And taking it back to God and say, okay, can you use this in me to bring transformation out of the trauma that I'm facing? And for, you know, one person's trauma for someone else will be nothing. You know, it's all relative to our individual lives and who we are. You know, and some people might feel, hey, they're, nothing really bothers them, but that's just an external persona most of the time. It's like, what's going on the inside?
Right.
Right.
You know, where are we? I mean, last
Right.
year for me, well, this year still in, I'm thinking in 2020. So I'm sort of thinking I'm already in 2020. So
You're
I'm
on a
thinking
different
about last
timeline.
You're
year.
already
I am
ahead.
a little bit, you know, at the moment. But actually in 2019, you know, I went through 3 or 4 really, really difficult situations that brought me into the reality of, actually, how do I deal with this? How is this affecting me? How is this going to be outworked my life? You know, I got betrayed by people who were probably the closest people to me, and that was a shock because I trusted them, and then that trust got broken, and then it was like, what do you deal with that? Well, forgive, release, bless them, but don't be stupid enough to jump back into the situation if it ain't changed. You know, it's like there's
Right.
wisdom in there as well as forgiveness. Doesn't throw wisdom out.
Right.
So
Right.
deal with that. And, you know, I had to go through the processes of working that out, going through the process that it affected a lot of other people, you know, and helping them work it out. And not, you know, they got a lot angrier than I did, and I'm trying to help them deal with their anger, because, you know, what's happened, I mean, this is real life. I mean, stuff like
Yes.
that, you know, it's
Well,
how you deal with it, you know, that's important. You know, live,
yeah.
if you're at
You know,
rest by the storm, then you can deal with it in love,
yeah.
and God can use it to transform you. Because I had a few sleepless nights of trying to work out, why did this happen? You know, what's going on? Did I do anything? Why did I not see it? I mean, all the questions that you face, and in the end, it's
And
like,
those are the growing points. I mean, that's these
take it
things
back
come along to help us grow and process things that we wouldn't have processed otherwise.
absolutely, you know,
Yeah.
and, you know,
And
so
you know,
real life situations you have to face, but they are the points that bring transformation. If we let them,
yeah.
you know, or we can sweep them under the carpet or stuff them all down and put on a brave face,
and
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 then
then comes
they're
the
just festering
disease.
away on the inside.
You know, then comes the internal, the trauma, the autoimmune diseases, and the,
Yeah,
you
all
know,
that.
all of this crazy stuff happens when you do that, though.
It does, and
So
that's why, you know, it's better to be open and honest and transparent about it, and
yeah.
actually be real. We don't have to be in denial that we're struggling emotionally to deal with various issues. You know, in my family this year, I've had several situations which have been really difficult, and there weren't something I was in control of. I couldn't, it wasn't my fault, but they happened to my children. Things, you know, we discovered some things that happened with some of my children, and it was just like, how do you deal with that? In the same way, you've got to be real, you've got to be honest. He carries our burdens and our sorrows and all of that, you know, engage the Father in it, but don't hide it, and
Right.
therefore I don't have to pretend life is wonderful when actually happiness is based on circumstances. I can be joyful in the midst of circumstances because I know God's with me and he loves me, but doesn't mean that I'm happy about the fact that, I discovered various things in my family and my children were hurt and being affected, that actually, if I, as a father, could have protected him from that, I would have done, but I couldn't. And therefore I didn't. And therefore they're suffering. So how do you deal with that? And, it's like, well, God, it's your fault. Why did you let that happen? Well, that ain't going to get you anywhere because we know God's love and,
Yeah.
God didn't let that happen. It's like,
Well,
you
something I've said for probably decades is that, this life is a character building experience. God is either working something into you or out of you. So, if we can kind of change our perspective to realize that and just to go with the flow and not, when we get so uptight and want to fight against what Father's trying to do, that's when it gets really hard. But when we just let it flow, and I know some people have gone through some horrific things, and I know that can be fun, kind of feel trivial, and yet, my mother passed this last year, and that was difficult. But I've been in this season, and it was there were some wonderful things that came out of that in just processing it and going through that. So it can seem like, how can you find goodness in that? And I know, again, there's been people that have gone through a lot worse things. But again, when we have a heavenly perspective and realize that this sliver of life that we're living right here on the earth can't even be measured in eternity, but Father has given it to us in order to build character for some purpose that I don't know that we are even yet to understand what it is. But there's some great and wonderful things coming in eternity that Father is using this lifetime to help prepare us for. And it's just a different perspective when we can understand that he's working something into us or out of us in this life that we're living. So, well, we got about 5 minutes left. Anything else you want to jump on and end with here before we close this section?
Yeah, I just feel that, as God brings us into a place of deeper intimacy, then we realize that in our sonship position, we do have authority to bless.
Yeah.
That's the key. Our authority is to bless. God said to Abraham that all the families of the earth would be blessed through you. And I believe that we all have that mandate to be blessed, but to be a blessing. Mm-hmm. To receive, but to be givers. Yes. Freely you've received, freely give. So for me, the more we get closer to God, the more we have to give, and the more love there is to go around, in a sense, because the more you've experienced, we love because he first loved us.
Right.
And it's one of the things I think God has really challenged me over this year is, do not have old covenant thinking. So live under the law and live in duty and obligation, but live in desire. And so, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, and all your strength, and your neighbor as yourself. And God challenged me over, is that a good thing? And I'm like, well, yeah, of course it's a good thing. He said, why do you think that's a good thing? Well, don't you want me to love you with everything? Yeah, but what's the context? The law. That was a law, and the lawyer said that. What must you do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus said, well, what do you think? And he said, well, this. Well, that was the best under the law, but the law makes you dutiful and obliged to fulfill it, or else. Whereas then Jesus comes along and says, a new commandment I give unto you. Now, immediately, most people will think law, because they think commandment equals law, when actually commandment is not law. And even in the Old Testament, when it was a commandment, it wasn't law. It was a guide, a direction. Here's where you can walk on the right path. So a new commandment I give unto you, love one another. Well, if you stop there, then you can try and love one another because you think this is the law, and there will be consequences if you don't, but there may be blessings if you do. But actually, it then goes on to say, as I have loved you. So we can only love each other as we are loved. So within that commandment, and if you look at the actual word, which is entole, it actually means with the goal of. So here is the goal: be loved, and therefore you'll be able to love. Now that takes away the whole concept of I am obliged and it is my duty to keep this commandment, which I can't do, and therefore I will fail in keeping that commandment because I'm trying to do it in my own strength. Or I allow God and experience Him loving me in an unconditional way, which empowers me to love other people in an unconditional way, which means it's irrespective of what they believe or don't believe or anything else. It is because they're children of God. And therefore, if I've been loved as a child of God, then I want to love other people in the same way. So freely I've received, freely give. And God said to me, He said, are you trying to please me? Do you want to be pleasing to me? And I'm like, well, yeah. And is that a bad thing? He said, well, don't you know you're already pleasing to me? So why are you trying to do things to make yourself pleasing to me when you're already pleasing to me because you're my child?
Amen.
And I thought, oh, well, my thinking
Good
needs
point.
deconstructing. I'm still thinking under the law and duty and obligation of commands rather than, hey, he's walking with me, he's in me to guide me into the truth, to walk it out, which is a freedom to have relationship not based on performance. And God loves us unconditionally, isn't based on our performance. We can't make Him love us anymore, and we can't make Him love us any less.
Right.
So let's enjoy the relationship, and that relationship will empower us to love others, to freely give what we freely received.
Yeah. So, and one of the things that's really on my heart, and I think it's on your heart as well, is getting people to understand that we need to love with the love that the Father has given to us, which for me means I need to receive the love that He is giving to me, and that He loves me, and that I need to love myself as He loves me. And when I am in that place, there's a confidence and there's a flow that comes from that, to where I just love being able to have conversation with people who believe differently than I do. I really enjoy that. I mean, to even sit down with a Muslim or a New Ager or somebody and have conversation with them and be truly interested in them and what they're having to say, versus in my mind just constantly going, oh, I got to convert them, got to change them, got to get them to believe the way I do. That's the old school thought that I'm not complete unless I can make someone believe the way I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, Mike, thank you for being on here. Do you have a few more minutes for the behind the scenes?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Berlin, why don't you go ahead and close us out?
All right. Thank you so much for joining us today on Kingdom Talks. And thank you, Mike. We so appreciate you being here. Thank you to our members, because we cannot produce this without you, and especially when we're on the road. So this is, we just love you and we appreciate your support. And if you haven't become a member yet, uh, even even though we do give extra stuff to the members, we love it that you just support us because you love what we're doing.
Yeah.
And so if you haven't done that yet, we invite you to go to kingdomtalksmedia.com and click on the member button there and become a member on Patreon. We appreciate you. And also, if you haven't taken the pledge yet, we're calling 100,000 believers to join with us in unity to go ahead and take that 3 plumb lines pledge. And you'll also find that on kingdomtalksmedia.com on the pledge button. So thank you so much again, and we will see you on the other side.
All right. Love you all. Take care. See you next time.
Bye-bye.